Today's ABP webinar event, Importance of Cultural Communications in Africa Business Success. With us today as our presenter is Melissa Sanderson, who is not just a dear friend and mentor, but also the Vice President of International Relations at Freeport-McMoRan Copper and Gold. While in the diplomatic service, Melissa was assigned to serve in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where she fell in love with the culture and the people. When Freeport-McMoRan offered her a job, she happily accepted on the contingency that she got to stay in the DRC. Eventually, she was forced to return stateside to work in the corporate headquarters, but has maintained a close relationship with her adopted brothers and sisters across Africa. Talking to Mel, you would never guess that she is an only child. In Phoenix, Mel, as many of you may know, is kind of considered a bit of a rock star, having been awarded the 2015 Athena Businesswoman of the Year Award in the private sector. She also serves as president of the Phoenix Committee on Foreign Relations, the chair of the Arizona District Export Council, is a member of GPEC's International Leadership Council, and recently joined the board of the Arizona Council for Economic Education. But most impressive among Mel's accomplishments include the time she narrowly escaped kidnapping by General Noriega in Panama, the time she jumped from a helicopter to burn marijuana fields in El Salvador, and surviving bombardment by unhappy opposition forces in Kinshasa. So, needless to say, I'm thrilled to turn the time over to someone like Mel who's had true experience in the world of cultural communication.
So, Jessica, I have to say, after listening to that rousing introduction, if I'm blushing or if I need to maybe jump out of a window, something heroic. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today and for spending some time listening to me talking about one of the big passions of my life. I usually tell people that Africa is kind of like malaria. If it doesn't kill you, it gets into your blood and it never leaves you. So I warn you in advance, you could be setting out on a highly addictive course as you consider the opportunities and the possibilities of doing business in Africa. So where to start? You know, it's really funny. In casual conversation with so many people, I get the impression that there are some Americans who think that Africa is a giant country. And of course, as we know, Africa is actually a highly diverse continent. And it's characterized by distinct languages, and that is not just between countries, but within countries. It has distinct cultures, again, between countries, but also within countries. I want to give you a few examples of what I'm talking about. Let's start in Nigeria, the largest country on the African continent, and frequently in the news. Well, Nigeria is characterized by a sharp north-south division among its 500-plus tribes. And by the way, 500-plus tribes means 500-plus distinct tribal languages. Nigeria also is characterized by a sharp Islam-Christian divide, which, not coincidentally, mirrors that north-south divide that I talked about before. One of the things that's important to remember about Africa, generally speaking, is its colonial history, because almost every country, without exception, was at one point the property of a country not on the continent. So France and Britain were certainly the largest colonizers, but the slave traders that worked out of Tanzania, the Arab-speaking Islamic slave traders who worked out of Tanzania, also left a distinct footprint, particularly in the countries where the slave trade worked out of the ports. And a few others. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So when the colonial period ended, a lot of tribes found themselves artificially separated. And you'll find, therefore, that in the case of Nigeria, some of the Islamic and Yoruba-speaking tribes actually have cousins right across the border to whom culturally they're much closer than to fellow Nigerians in the capital in the south. So a different example would be Botswana, which I usually point to as the African country which works. Quiet little country, you hardly ever hear about Botswana, except, of course, if you're talking about really superior safaris. And yet, it's one of the best places in which to do business. It has a very stable, transparent environment. And part of that is because there's really only two tribes in Botswana that share a common language, and they therefore don't have as much internal reason for conflict. There's not those long-standing animosities. That said, that's not always the key to peace. Looking at Rwanda, a country that I know some of you are doing business in, you really see, again, two major tribes, although in Rwanda there are other minority tribes as well. But you see in Rwanda two large and dominant tribes, the Hutu and Tutsi. And we all know about the horrible genocide that took place there in the 1990s. So merely having fewer tribes doesn't always guarantee a stable, transparent environment, although it helps. Again, in Rwanda, we find that it's a relatively good place for doing business. It has very clear regulations, and by and large, those regulations are respected, as is also the case in Botswana. That is not the case in Nigeria. And sadly, even in my beloved Democratic Republic of the Congo, we find serious divides. In the case of the Congo, it's an east-west divide that pits essentially Swahili-speaking Easterners against Lingala-speaking Westerners. And let's throw in the added complication of over 300 tribes and 3 more dominant linguistic groups. So you can see that just as our slide shows, Africa truly is a crazy quilt of interesting history, interesting culture, interesting language. And if you approach all of that with an open mind and a desire to learn, it can keep you engaged, and it can also make for very good business dealings. So in setting out to consider the possibilities of Africa, you really want to do some research before you get too deep. And I can't recommend strongly enough the importance of being in contact with the U.S. Embassy in whatever country may be of interest to you. Let's just continue with Nigeria for a moment. You would want to reach out to the embassy in Nigeria or to the consulates, because the embassy may refer you to one of the smaller posts that we have in country that's going to be closer to the actual area where you want to do business. Let's start with the U.S. Embassy. You want to talk to both the political section and to the economic section, because those officers working there can really give you some valuable information about the country's history and its current circumstances and how those two things are related. Because continuing with Nigeria, there's a long history of that stress, the north-south stress that I mentioned, and you don't want to inadvertently stumble into a complex situation. The other huge resource that embassies have are the commercial officers. And these are the folks who work for the Department of Commerce versus the Department of State, but they specialize in helping businesses do business in a country, in this case, Nigeria. And these guys, together with the State Department economic officers, can put you in touch, for instance, with a U.S. Nigeria Chamber of Business, or a mining chamber, or a telecommunications chamber, because in almost all of the largest African countries, they have specialized chambers as well as general business chambers. And making connections at that level can be a good place to start as well. The other resource that the State Department has available at the embassies would be a list of lawyers. Because trust me, no matter where you're going to do business overseas, you're going to need a good lawyer. I don't care if it's Mexico or if it's the Congo. Because even here in the United States, as we all know, the laws are complex and it's easy to get off on the wrong foot. So the State Department actually vets lawyers, so they make sure that they are compliant with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and I'll come back to that one in a minute. And in many cases, they are also English speaking, and in some cases, they have been educated either in the United States or Europe. So having one of these law firms or an individual lawyer as a partner early in the process of looking at doing business in any African country is a very valuable resource indeed. So you see on your slide here, we have a website listed, www.state.gov. And I do want right here to speak about Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, because it's certainly one of the big things that keeps many American companies from doing business in Africa, because of this broad-based perception that it's possible to do business. And I'm here to tell you that while corruption is certainly a problem on the continent, plenty of honest government, honest lawyers, and certainly there are plenty of laws and regulations. And you do your due diligence, what we're discussing here. There's no reason for the requirements of the FCPA to keep you from taking standing opportunities that there are in Africa. So Africans are, by and large, increasingly sophisticated. When I first, there was virtually no internet service. And now there's a more than 65% internet penetration rate in the Congo. And the Congo is Africa's third largest country, but also one of the ones with the worst infrastructure, possibly in the whole world, not just on the African continent. So much was destroyed during the war, roads and bridges, and of course, electricity. So that said, because of this increased penetration of the internet, Africans understand very well how Americans prefer to communicate. But I love this slide because you might notice the absolutely befuddled and amazed look on the young man's face. And it's not because he doesn't understand his internet phone or his computer. It's because all of the American reliance on phone calls, increasingly emails, because, goodness, we all hate to actually even meet up in a conference room and talk to each other live. Those particular means of communication, as I say, Africans understand that this is part of our culture, but they don't resonate to it. They don't respect it at a certain level as so impersonal as meaningless. You know, someone recently said to me, you know, Africans actually like the lights of the eyes of a person that they're doing business with. And you know, in a sense, that's very true. Having that personal connection and that sense of what sort of a person is this is fundamental to building trust. And in Africa, relationships are founded on a couple things. One of them, obviously, that would be number one, tribal relations. Number two, tribes do still matter. And if given a choice, you know, a member of a tribe with which one is historically at war, one is going to try to help one's tribal brother. But the third level of relationship is that personal one between you as an American, African partners, and relationship you through to success. Because in America, we all know how it goes. There are plenty of laws, there are plenty of regulations, but every once in a while, the contract is the one who knows somebody. We consider that kind of corruption. Let's just give a concrete example to the Congo, and obviously I don't know anybody. One of the first things that I did was to make friends with a couple of the embassy employees. And when I wanted to meet someone, let's share a plan at the time was a gentleman named Olivier Conan, one of my embassy employees. Well, oh my goodness, I got the whole history about he's the son of a mixed marriage, his father was Belgian, so you see where I'm going with this. These relationships, these friendships that you absolutely want to develop are what are going to safeguard you. Because imagine if they had come back to me and said, well, you know, Olivier was a traitor in war, and the president can't stand him, and et cetera, et cetera. So my relationship would have gone in a completely different direction based on what I had been told. And the more friends that you have, the more complete picture you get, and the better protected you will be. The best investment for success at any time is going to be to actually go to Africa. But obviously that's very expensive, even if you fly coach, have all the hotel expenses, and you have meal expenses because, you know, you will obviously have to host dinners and lunches. This can be a big investment, and not every company managed to do that successfully. We actually had a question from one of our participants, and her question was, what are you supposed to do if you can't fly back North Africa and get to know people and etc.? And oh, by the way, before I move on, let me encourage you, if you have questions, at the top of your screen, question and answer button right there. And so please do go ahead and type in your questions, and I'll be glad to answer them at the end of this presentation. So if you're not able to travel back and forth, at least immediately, thanks to that internet penetration that I was talking about earlier, we have the joys of Skype. So if you have, following our recommendations here today, been in touch with the embassy and been referred by the embassy to, let us just say, a lawyer, then via the embassy you will have received his coordinates and he will have received yours. That's, as we all know these days, virtually all that is needed to set up a Skype call. And Africans love Skype calls. Everybody that I know, whenever possible. I mean, my goodness, I spend most of my weekend, as a matter of fact, Skyping with friends. So this is a great way to start building that bridge, because at least you do have that face-to-face contact. There's some in all of the African cultures, and you can get a sense for this a guy or a woman that I would feel comfortable working with, and they, of course, are getting the same impression about you. And oh, by the way, the joy of starting with Skype is, let's just say you get the feeling that I'm not really comfortable with this person. It's just something about them we're not clicking. That's great. You go back to the embassy and you go back to that list that they have. You can make some other recommendations for me. So, you know, you want to make sure that you get off on the right foot, because, you know, every country, and I don't care where we're talking about in the world, we've got good people and bad people. And someone can be highly educated and successful in a business sense, but not necessarily be the right person for you, not necessarily be that good person. So, you know, this is the other advantage of starting at the Skype level, that you get that sense, and if you need to sort of look for a partner, this is your easy way to do it. You know, we love talk. kind of over the world as the people talk. And the classic image of the early American is that person who, instead of listening to what they're being told, continues to insist on their point and just says it and louder, on the theory that eventually the stupid person listening to them is going to either get their point and agree with them or, otherwise give up. The thing is, to be successful, you really have to give your second chance to talk to a kind of person that I can really work with. They're going to be answering the kinds of questions that you need to ask, such as, I understand that the government is preparing to revise mining code. How would that affect my investment? So you want to make sure that you're actually listening to those answers so that you get the most out of it. So one of the things that you're going to want to do for several reasons is to learn a few key phrases. In my life, living all around the world, I have found that the most important thing to need to say is thank you. Merci, gracias, domo arigato, whatever the language is. Even if that's the only phrase that you ever learn, you will make friends by being able to say thank you in the local language. And another one that's always good to know anywhere in the world, where's the bathroom? Trust me, you don't want to be that person who's sort of jumping up and down like a small kid trying through body language to signal that you need a bathroom. That happened to me once. It's not very pleasant to me. On the issue of are allowed, that they have to be small and carving or about Native Americans, something of the sort. And oh, by the way, Africans are fascinated by our Native Americans. So that anything related to Native culture in America is always going to be an exceptionally well-received gift. When you actually close a deal and you've begun to do business, you might actually want to consider a personal gift not paid for out of your business that is something Native American, like, a carving or something of the sort. Now, the other thing that's very popular are sports gifts. And this is true even if you're dealing with a sophisticated business person in an urban setting, because that sophisticated urban African will be able to take things like a soccer ball or a basketball. Those two are particularly popular, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And bake those, for instance, to their family in the village, or to a project in a village that they're working on for their own business interests. As I think we all know, soccer is a huge game on the African continent because it's accessible. I've literally been in small villages and I've seen kids playing soccer with mangoes. Coming back to the head, keep it small and distinctly American. I mean, a T-shirt from your favorite sporting team, whether it's, American football or whether it's baseball or whatever. And this goes back to building those relationships. Because then you're going to sit down over some wine or some beer or whatever, and you're going to talk about the local soccer team and our local football team or whatever. So that's why these sorts of things matter. Now, there's another cultural aspect in Africa that I haven't touched on yet, and that is the question of time. So we're very impatient, and things aren't done, in 5 minutes, we get frustrated. And if they're not done in 10 minutes, we walk away. Well, that's not quite the same in Africa. For Africans, here in Phoenix, we talk a lot about mañana, the mañana attitude. And Africans have something very similar. Everything will happen in its own time. And even though your African business partner may say to you, oh, yes, everything is going well, And all of our permits are going to come through in the next, let's say the next month. Well, and as I think some of you on the phone probably already know this from personal experience, it may be a year later, and your partner is still saying, yes, any day now, those permits are going to come out of the ministry. It's not just because your partner doesn't know what's happening, for instance. It's not just that, oh, you're being stonewalled because you're a foreigner. It's not just that the bureaucracy is moving slowly because you're not paying bribes, although that latter one does have something to do with it sometimes. But a lot of times it's just simply that there's so much bureaucracy in Africa. And, you know, it's very rare, with the exception of countries like Rwanda that has a true sort of one-stop business shop. It's very rare that you're going to actually get something through in a simple way. Concave, let's just say that you want to be in the business of importing telephones to Nigeria. Well, in order to import telephones to Nigeria, you'll need a permit from the Ministry of Trade, the Ministry of Communications, from the Ministry of Economy, from the Ministry of Planning. And so right there, you've got 4 ministries and all the bureaucrats in those ministries whose whole existence depends on how many papers they can have on their desk and how long those papers can stay on their desk before they move on to the next desk. So this is what you're up against in a kind of a hidden way. Now, part of what you're up against also can be politics, and that's again why relationships matter. When I first went to the Congo, it was right after the war, and the United States, together with the United Nations, had set up a structure for a transitional government to move the country off of the war footing and back towards a civilian functional basis. And in order to induce everyone to take part, we divided up the goodies, I guess you could say. So President Kabila's strongest opponents during the war got control of all the financial elements. The next most significant opponents to the president were given the military functions. And of course, the president maintained, his role as president and overall control of the country. But what happened in that scenario, the unforeseen consequence was that, officials that responded to the president spent a lot of time trying to block any initiatives that they thought were coming from the enemies in the economic sector or in the military sector, and vice versa. The officials in the economic sector were busy trying to make sure that nothing that the president wanted to get done actually happened. The guys in the military sector were busy trying to make sure that neither the economic sector nor the president actually managed to get anything done in the military arena. And sadly, in indigenous African governments, by which I mean no foreign interference, as was the case in the DRC, a lot of times the same kind of politics is at play. So you may be completely in compliance with the law and all appropriate regulations, and you're still having trouble interested in outcomes, to come back to our previous example. And doesn't realize some foreigner with deeper pockets and more connections to get into that industry ahead of him and possibly ensure that, it'll never be viable for him. So again, this is where having strong African partners stands you in good stead. It can actually look you, and an African believes in your business plan, and an African sees the opportunities not just for himself but for his whole family. He or she is going to be the best friend that you're ever going to need. So with that, let me stop there. There we go. So here's Moses. Okay, so Moses asks, over the past years, China has taken a sort of larger share of in and with Africa. What cultural advantage have we been leveraging to potential ventures in Africa? Okay, good news, Moses. On the China question, let's start with the fact that Africans don't really like Chinese. Africans, in some ways, particularly in rural settings, may not have access to education. That doesn't mean they don't have access to common sense and the ability to know what's happening around them. So I remember one time I was standing in a grocery store in Lumumbashi, and ahead of me was a Chinese lady, and she had her little daughter with her, and she was clearly doing, the grocery shopping for the family. And when her turn came, she didn't speak, in fact, she didn't seem to speak English, poor thing. And the cashier was just berating her, just yelling at her and calling her obscenities and telling her that, all the Chinese should be forced out of the country, etc. And I felt so bad for the poor woman. I mean, I stepped in and basically said, oh, just let her alone, just take her money, you're holding everybody else up. But it was a very illustrative example because, the Chinese have used Africa, and these days are starting to use Latin America as well, as a way to handle their surplus population. I mean, if you look at Zambia, for instance, there are more Chinese in the country, and it's over 1 million. The problem with Chinese is not to make technology transfer, provide sort of technical training or teaching. Literally, I remember long ago, I had a Chinese company building a road. Not only did the road fall to pieces and so jobs where the companies came by the road with tiny hammers, smashing big parts into little rocks. Chinese did everything else. We benefit from the fact that we have not been a proud compliment. We benefit from the fact that we still have a very positive perception in almost every African country. Exceptions exist, obviously. Nigeria being a good one. The perception of Americans is very low in Nigeria, but they don't like Chinese either. So going in, we have a cultural advantage. And I think that is absolutely huge. So that, I guess, Moses, is how I would, let's hear. Do you find and do due diligence on solid African partners? How do you find and do due diligence on solid African partners? The best way to find and do due diligence on partners can be through there is a section of the State Department officers, because trust me, we know, the diplomatic service, we know who the corrupt bad guys are. And conversely, we know who the good guys are. So that's why I cannot over stress enough that is a huge source from the G1. And then we have a question from Claire. There are a number of absolutely question that points out that there are Black and African after generation, they also add Black African in country. There are families that originally might have come from Britain but have been multi-generational Kenyans. in Botswana, in Zimbabwe, South Africa. And of course, in South Africa, you also have the descendants of the Boers. So you have both white South Africans whose cultural heritage is British, and you have white South Africans whose cultural heritage is the Boer. The Afrikaans language that many of the white Africans in South Africa speak is from that origin. So let me see. We have a question of using the same principles for market. The same thing applies because among the diaspora in the United States, you have exactly the same tribal structures and linguistic structures. Some settle through also to the second generation. So you would definitely want to apply the same principles of interrelationship, establishing trust, and of being able, therefore, to use your diaspora partner as a way to launch into doing business on the African continent. Okay, we have a question of what role does your organization play in vetting organizations to do business in Africa? How do you identify real companies with interest in Africa? Okay, well, in terms of what role does the African Business Portal play? Because I believe that's what you mean by your organization. We have a question that does the African Business Portal help in vetting organizations to do business in Africa? The organizations and partners of the African Business Portal all have certain principles in common. First and foremost of which is complete adherence to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and agreements signed to that. So that's huge, fundamental thing that's already been done for you. The African Business Portal also and with information about the countries. And in terms of how do you identify real companies with interest in Africa, the portal provides the opportunity for companies already doing this in Africa, whether they're owned by Africans or other foreigners who are in Africa, to connect with the members here in the United States who may have additional resources or additional product to bring to bear. A lot of your connecting right through the ABP. So it's a huge potential resource, and that's one reason that I'm very pleased to be part of it. Do you have a list of small to medium companies with interest in East Africa? Okay. So the small medium companies with interest in East Africa. Get back to you on that, or even better still, I'll have Jessica or Lee get back to you on that because they're going to be more knowledgeable in that regard than myself. Okay, so is it smart to have someone in country who can help with face-to-face communications when I'm not there? Okay. So, yes, it's absolutely smart to have someone in country. This comes back to what I've been saying about the importance of partnerships. So that is the person who's going to continue to build out your network. So ideally, each time that you invest in another trip to Africa, your original partner or partners are going to have more opportunities available for you, more people for you to meet. And very importantly, and this is where that trust comes in, these are going to make sure that, let's say, the tax officials don't suddenly show up at the door of your small business claiming that, oh, you're in violation of Regulation X and you have to pay us $600,000. So you absolutely have to have that in-country partner who can deal with the face-to-face communications. Let me see, we have a question, are there steps that can be taken to repair communication mishaps? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, unless you've, gosh, can I think of something so extreme? Well, I guess if you, I don't know, said something to someone like, wow, your heritage is really questionable, it might be a little hard to get past that one. But other than that, and particularly because Africans are very forgiving. I mean, Africans understand we Americans a lot better than we Americans understand them. So yes, you can only apologies go a very long way. Interesting, Claire, I 100% agree. Claire says that she has found that being a white woman has helped her enormously in doing business in Africa. 100% agreed. Number one, it's helpful to be a woman, period. Sorry, guys. But we women have the terrific advantage as we gain the respect of our African partners of becoming Mama, being Mama Mel or Mama Claire is absolutely huge because that brings with it a whole surrounding context of respect and trust and confidence. And, you know, that fact about being a white woman, absolutely, because we also are that two things at once. We're that trustworthy mama in the African, but we're also part world that is still, even today, even in sophisticated urban settings in Africa, that white world is still seen as having something special about it. So we become, as white women, that sort of trustworthy emissary that can bridge the African world and the white world. So 100% advantage. Let's see. Oh, Benson's interested in a possible trade mission to East Africa. Well, I tell you what, Benson, there are folks that I know who are on this call who are either from Kenya or are working in Rwanda, for instance, Uganda, and are ABP members. So I would definitely encourage you to start that dialogue and see what can come from it. Okay, and Moses is asking, you have emphasized the importance of face-to-face discussions. Aha! Actually, as far as I know, the ABP is currently in the process of getting all of its materials put into French in order to be more accessible for the French-speaking businesses in Africa or, you know, French-speaking businesses in Europe. Because I hadn't yet touched on the importance of the European presence as well. I mean, there are Belgians, for instance, in the Congo, and and Belgium itself still has significant business presence. And Belgium, of course, is a French-speaking country, well, partly anyway. It also has some Flemish speakers. France maintains strong contacts with Africa as well. So, yes, the African Business Portal is in the process of increasing its linguistic presence in French. And il y a aussi des personnes qui parlent bien le français who can also help. I'm sure that there are other ABP members who are French speakers who also would be very glad to help. Okay, so Benson is saying that he would suggest that anyone willing to venture out to Africa engage Africans with experience in doing business in Africa. Absolutely. Things that you must learn to succeed, the culture, dealing with corruption, etc. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you know, there are classes in Swahili. I have a nice online package, Benson, where I learned a lot of Swahili. So what are business meeting cultures? I think I understand the question to mean when you're actually sitting in Africa and having a meeting. Well, let me tell you something. My secret to success is food. Because most Africans, they're not into, let me come to your office and we'll sit down together for 20 minutes and, close the deal. That's not really what it's about. It's more about, let's have lunch together, or let's have dinner together, let's, have some social time, and let's have some business time. So, my experience, a lot of my business meetings in the Congo took place in restaurants where we were really hashing things out, and we were hashing them out over great steaks with lots of beautiful red wine, and sometimes, well into the night. Because that's another thing. Most Africans aren't in bed at 9 o'clock. So, you need to make sure that you're available. Maybe your dinner's going to start at 8 or 9, and you're going to close down the restaurant at midnight or 1 o'clock. So there's all kinds of really awesome possibilities, and it can be tons of fun. The biggest thing I would say always is just do your research, make sure you got your fundamentals right, and have fun with it. Thanks so much for being with me today. I really appreciate it. And I think here's Jessica for final word.
Thank you, Mel, so much for your presentation today. And thank you to Polsinelli for sponsoring today's ABP. We hope that you enjoyed the presentation and that you will join us again for our upcoming East Africa webinar series. It's going to be amazing. Thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful day.